Welcome back. In this video I'm going to show you how to set up a grid art journal page in an A5 sketchbook. I'm also going to show you some of the types of things that I've been putting into my grid art journal pages as inspiration for you to get started. Earlier this year I came across a few videos on YouTube about grid art journaling, and the main idea is that you have multiple small blocks on your page so you could do several different mini sketches of the same topic. For instance, when I first started with my grid art journal page, I just put some simple words in the first few blocks. My next attempt, I drew the coast near my city of Vancouver at English Bay. This is a subject I've frequently painted, and on a side note, I'm beginning to think I might just be a seascape sketchbooker type person, but we'll see. But within the 6 images I drew, each one showed a different mood for the actual subject, but really the topic was the same. In my early grid journaling art pages, I did watercolour washes first on the page and then went back over with the pencil sketch and then the black pen. I'm really quite keen on nature journaling as well. I like working with shells. So I drew 6 different shells on my shells grid art journal page. I do have a small collection of shells, so this is always an inspiration for me. Then I colour them in with the coloured pencils as well. On the next page I have only 3 blocks, and I wrote some sayings that I like to have about me as uplifting words to look at during the course of the day. The first one says, "There is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune." That's a quote from Shakespeare. The second one is, "Don't live someone else's dream." And the third one is, "Fortune favours the brave," which my father used to say. My next grid sketch was of seed pods, and I have a few selections here. I don't know all the names of these seed pods, and I did draw them from memory because I do have a bit of a collection of seeds and pods, and I'll show that to you one day. Next came Fruity. First I penciled it in, then I did an ink over with a black pen, erased the pencil marks, and then went in with watercolour. And finally, I touched it up with a little bit of markers. On my sunflowers page, I drew many drawings of sunflowers, looking at them from different angles. Some are single heads, some are on the side views, and others are close-ups, zooming in on the actual sunflower seeds. For the tarot cards, when I divided my grid into 4 rectangles, it occurred to me to draw some tarot cards. I just selected the Magician, the Empress, the Star and the Sun. Once more with pencil and then going in with a black pen, and these were then coloured in with markers. For my creation spread, this is a double page spread where I have 8 grid segments. The first being the title, which is Genesis 1:128, and this is the first writing in the Bible, starting at, "In the beginning God created heaven and earth." I then go on to show the 7 days of the creation with mini sketches of what happened on each day of the creation. At this point I was gifted a book from my son-in-law called The New Beachcomber's Guide to the Pacific Northwest by J. Duane Sept. This is a book that has lots of images of shells and other interesting creatures that actually live here on the coast in Vancouver. This was brilliant because it gave me different shell shapes to draw, and on this particular page I've named the shells because I happen to know what they are. They're not just my imaginary shells that I'm working on. A lot of these shells have what I would call fancy names, but my favourite is the Money Wentle Trap, which I believe is a great name for a shell. The next page I attempted to call my Rock Pool Adventures. Here I drew 6 different views of an intertidal rock pool that I would imagine would be in the coast here at the beach. A rock pool is created when the tide comes in, it fills up a pool and the tide goes out, and some animals get trapped within the water and they can't get out again until the next tide comes in. These are known as intertidal rock pools, and I ended up drawing the sea star to which I added a face. Now these particular sketches became the beginning sketches of a children's book which I recently published. But before I did this grid sketch, I had no idea I was going to create a children's book. The idea only came to me once I'd done the drawings of the rock pools and the sea star, but I'll tell you more about that project in another video. For my next grid sketchbook page, I penciled in the actual box, but I didn't draw it in ink. Then when I drew the leaves and the vines with the black pen, they are in the shape of the box, but there's no line holding them in. This was a different way of working with the space. The next page in my sketchbook, I gave over to a prayer. I was feeling a bit lower as I was having some surgery that week, and I wrote these words down to let me be able to concentrate on this prayer. This next one, I had 6 blocks, but it was a combination of squares and rectangles in a sort of windmill shape on the page. I was trying to break away from just straight up grid of 2 blocks by 3 blocks and going with a different shape in the grid. Within these squares and rectangles, I have some seeds, seed pods, pea pods, acorns, and whatnot. When I sketched this page, I was doing some recovering health-wise, and it was taking a long time. This saying popped into my head. A well woman has many wishes, an ill woman only one. And this really did hook into how I was feeling at the time, that really all I wanted to do was get better. We're seeing it as a well woman, so I thought, well, I might as well draw a woman at a well, although the image is really slightly different to what the actual saying is about, but there it is. Of course, there's always a cat somehow creeping in. Next, I have a page with Grace because I was still struggling, as I say, with some medical issues, struggling to eat and just about managing to get down some bone broth. At this time, I started to appreciate what I was eating, so I wrote a page for Grace. This ABC page is still a work in progress. I'm not very happy with the number 2 and the number 3. I don't really think it's working, and this is still in pencil, so I'm likely to erase it and not take it any further, and that's fine. Next up, I have a single page with 1 grid box. Is it a grid if there's only one? I don't know. Anyway, and I drew the lambis shell, which is a shell that I actually own. It's a very tricky drawing shells with all the curves, but I do enjoy them. Next, I did a 6 grid page with some seahorses. This was the time when I'd published the Sea Star book, and I was considering a second book in the series, which would then introduce a seahorse. Now, I find this was a particularly difficult animal to draw. I did give it several ways of working with it because there are many curves and the nose itself is really quite tricky, but anyway. So I created 6 different ways of looking at seahorses. This page I haven't taken any further, but it's still something that's percolating in my mind. With this next image, I started with 1 large frame, and then I decided it would make a good window. So it becomes a window frame, and I lightly shaded the walls in cream to give it prominence. I'm calling this one Down the Garden Path because from where we're standing, we're looking out of the window down a path to endless possibilities. There are some birds in a bird bath and a bench to sit on. There's a pond with ducks, and then you can go through the gate, continue on up into the mountains, past the sheep, to who knows where. It's one of those drawings where it's taking you somewhere, but you don't quite know where you're going, where it's going to take you yet. So I quite enjoyed drawing that one as well. And yes, I see there's another cat that snuck in there. The one with the vines is a grid drawing that's going across several of the grids. I've got 5 or so vines rooted in the 2 bottom squares, and they are developing and unfurling as they go up. This sketch is still just in pen, and I may or may not colour it in. In my grid sketch for the plant cycle, I've got a narrow ribbon arrow running behind each of the blocks to show you which way to go. So you follow the arrow as the plant develops, leaves, grows, buds, flowers, and so on, and then eventually the leaves drop off. So it depicts the plant cycle. This is still in a sketch form. I haven't quite finished it yet because it's an imaginary plant and I'm not quite sure if I'm happy with the 2 middle drawings, but that is something I can still think about and mull over. Now I'm just going to tell you how I actually draw these grids in my A5 sketchbook. My sketchbook contains pages that are 14 centimetres by 21.5 centimetres or 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches. From the right hand edge I measure 2 centimetres in and put a mark, and then I count 5 centimetres across and put another mark. And then another mark at 1 centimetre, and then over the last 5 centimetres I put another mark. So if you're doing this in inches, my squares are about 2 inches wide with half an inch in between. So if you start with your ruler 5 inches on your right hand edge, you would put a mark at 4.5 inches, 2.5 inches, 2 inches and 0. You would then get 2 columns of 2 inches wide with half an inch in between, and now you can just draw the vertical lines down the page for your columns. And then coming down the page from the top, you would measure it down 1 inch, then have a 2-inch square, half an inch for the gap, 2 inches for the middle grid block, half an inch for the next gap, and 2 inches for the bottom squares. Once I've lightly sketched out the squares, I will go from there. I draw my grid squares lightly, usually with a 2H pencil, although in this video I'm using an HB because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. Then I'll gently erase the pencil lines that I'm not going to need, that's sticking out the top and around in the middle. This is how you set up an A5 grid art journal page. Now you can get started on your grid art journaling. I'm Alison. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.